Thank you so much, and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to talk to you today about this topic. It's definitely not a one-size-fits-all kind of subject area, but as we all can figure, we can often draw a lot of parallels to our own institutions by looking at what others are doing, whether that's about computer-based testing or pretty much any other thing. And that goes for institutions that share your discipline and even ones that are in other domains. So again, my name is Evan Sanders. I'm the Associate Director of Curriculum Services at Harvard Medical School for Teaching and Learning Technologies, where I really have a hand in most things that our MD program is doing with respect to its undertaking of educational technology. And this goes for our support of curriculum that goes on in our classroom setting, which is primarily in the medical school setting, what happens sort of pre-clerkship. So students that are taking classroom-based courses prior to going into their clinical rotations, which historically were in the third year for our curriculum, but now actually have moved into the second year. And we have a lot of course managers on our team who essentially partner with faculty who direct the courses, and they're responsible for many different logistics that go on in the courses, whether it's the preparation and delivery of course materials or space planning and reservations and other types of meeting management. And so I have a huge hand in kind of directing our team through the use of computer-based testing and specifically ExamSoft, of course. And we've been using computer-based testing since the fall of 2014. And that means that we're in our third year of using ExamSoft, which is kind of hard to believe for me, actually. And we started the process of moving towards computer-based testing in early 2014. And I'll be drawing from our experience with that process during this session today. So I might as well start with the main takeaway point for this session, which is that as with most things you'll do in technology, it's important to remember that no piece of technology will solve all of your problems or achieve all your goals through some sort of magic. And I always say that success with technology, perhaps educational technology most of all, comes with careful planning and really thinking through how you're going to integrate it with your goals and operations. So in other words, I think it's really important to be realistic at all times and help others who work with you to have the same approach and attitude towards the endeavor. So we'll move along. I didn't create a traditional kind of PowerPoint slide deck, as you can see, because I don't think the process of adopting something like computer-based testing is really linear. I don't think it moves in a straight line. I'll try to go through all these points in a logical order, but I think a lot of the steps here can kind of be done concurrently or, in overlapping ways. So that's why I kind of made this little more free-form, web. And I've narrowed down the process to these 6 points that you see in the circle in the middle here. I think the one component that actually is in the right order is the first one, which is identifying goals, as I already kind of mentioned. And that probably goes without saying. If you don't really know why you're doing something, it's pretty hard to have a process around it. So we'll start there. And at Harvard Medical School, we just asked ourselves, why do we even need to do this? Why do we need to move towards a computer-based testing platform? And in a lot of respects, it was a reaction to many pain points that we had and that we've been experiencing over the years. And nowadays, we actually, compared to when we got started on ExamSoft, we have a completely redesigned curriculum, which is a story for another day, although I might touch on it a little bit. But at the time we started this process, we were under our previous curriculum, which consisted of many short organ system blocks that happened during the first 2 years of medical school when students are taking their basic science courses prior to going into the hospital rotations. And these courses were really variable in length. They could go as long as 11 weeks, and they could be as short as 3 days. So with that in mind, each of these courses really had distinct kind of operations around them. They all had a different course director. They all might have different pedagogies and were being administered in different ways. And that certainly was the case with the assessments in these courses. The way that we tested students, the way that We wrote tests, whether they were take-home, whether they were, highly secure. It was a really diverse set of these assessments, and that could be really difficult to maintain without a system, and specifically an electronic system. And we did have a lot of multiple choice exams, which had previously been administered by Scantron bubble sheets, which our students really, in this day and age, they really didn't even know what those were. They hadn't used them growing up or in high school. They'd already started taking exams on the computer, so then we were kind of taking them a step backwards to be using Scantron, even though they were quite familiar to me. And we had quite a few essay exams as well, which were pencil and paper. Our class size is 170 students, and so when we had an essay exam that could be as long as 20 pages, that required our team of course managers that I mentioned before to kind of stand around a table and walk around in a circle for an hour and decollate these exams. We used to call them decollating or recollating parties when it was over. Not that we really considered them much of a party, but we got pretty used to that process. And then we had to give these pages out to the graders. They had to grade them on paper. We had to transcribe all those scores, probably to an Excel sheet, put the exams back together, and give them back to students for review. So there was a lot of prayer involved in this process, I would say, because we're just managing these huge heaps of paper, and they're going out to 20 people to grade, and we're waiting sometimes for weeks to get them back. You'd hope that somebody wouldn't lose it in the mail. Sometimes we were like couriering these things to people, and they're walking them all around the medical area. You hope someone doesn't drop it in a puddle or something like that. So miraculously, we never had that kind of a catastrophe, but it got really draining on the team to kind of be hoping for the best all the time. And of course, this also caused really many delays for the assessment process for faculty, and delayed the feedback for students, and that's kind of a lose-lose situation. And we knew that, we knew that peer schools were using computer-based testing, and so around December of 2013, so just over 3 years ago, we started looking into moving in this direction. And we did pretty much simultaneously start looking at specific product and gather information from our faculty and students about their interest in this sort of thing around the same time. And that's why I kind of say that a lot of these steps can be taken on concurrently. So looking at the faculty, a lot of our initial conversations with them came out of things that we already knew from our experience working with them on their courses for so long. We have this team of course managers. Many of them have been around for years. They knew like kind of how everything worked in the courses pretty intimately. And we knew that a main thing for them is that they wanted to be able to reuse exams from year to year and improve on them. And frankly, we were collecting all this data from our Scantron bubble sheets, but nobody ever really wanted to do anything with those. And so continuous improvement was on everybody's minds, but in the end, it just didn't seem to be happening without a system to enable it. So faculty would often just write new exams every year. They would tell us that this was actually the hardest part of their job as a faculty member in our courses. They wanted quick and easy ways to analyze both the performance of the questions and also the performance of the students. And they wanted to do this in a sort of snapshot way, but also longitudinally to follow students over time. And so exam security goes without saying. It's really needed to accomplish this, because if we're giving back paper exams to students, even if we kind of collect them, after we let the students look at them, it's really not secure for many reasons. And, one thing that we heard over and over as well is that graders could really, on our essay exams, could barely stand to read the student handwriting anymore. And actually, our students, as I'll mention in a moment, also wanted to be typing essays. And so that was just kind of an additional pain point, maybe not the most important one, but something that we heard about, in a recurring fashion. And there's many more details about the faculty perspective, but these were kind of the recurring points. So moving on to the students, we try to run a couple technology focus groups per year, which is our way of just keeping a pulse on student satisfaction with what we're doing, and also hearing about technology that maybe they've used in other programs they've done. Many of them are coming right out of college, so they've had the opportunity to work with modern software, maybe before we've adopted something like that. And they might also have friends at other medical schools or other types of schools that are using something that we can learn from. So we'd heard quite a bit that other schools were using exam software, or they had elaborate testing centers or something like that. And we heard many times from the students that the most important aspect for them was to get timely feedback. And sometimes even a 24-hour turnaround of our multiple choice results using our Scantron system wasn't really cutting it, because although 1 day turnaround sounds good, the reality for students is that they're moving on to the next event in their course. They're starting to think about the next exam, or they might be moving on to another course entirely. And it was just operationally difficult for us to provide feedback, especially if faculty were restricting us from giving the exams back to keep. We would have to schedule specific hours for students to come in just to sort of get their score, and that just sort of seemed like the punishment wasn't fitting the crime, to use a cliche. And we didn't have a secure portal for distributing exam scores. That's something, fortunately, we've corrected now that we've adopted a better learning management system. But the fact that we actually had to have students come into the office just to get a score, that was just because we didn't really have a better way to securely transmit scores to them. So it seemed like we had a pretty big gap between what we were doing and what would be inherently useful to the student's experience. And maybe I should have started with this point, because it all comes down to the students in the end. I mean, that's our mission, is to educate students as an institution of higher learning. And so we always want to keep that in mind. So having a single platform for exam administration would make for a consistent experience for students, not just in terms of the way they get their results, but also the way that they would take exams. So if we are able to administer their exams on the same platform, then you can take kind of all these very disparate types of pedagogies and assessment types, but at least give students a really consistent exam experience. And that was something that was important to us. And as I mentioned, students wanted to type essays just as much as faculty were tired of reading their handwritten essays. So that also is something that satisfies both cohorts of people here. So as a staff person leading this charge, maybe the argument from the administrative side took precedent a little too often. In some ways, we felt that on the staff side, we were actually kind of pushing the school in this direction because it was going to make our operation so much easier. But to be honest, that was fine by me because it would help me. But realistically, it just wasn't sustainable to have so many processes for a similar goal, which is exam administration. And we just desperately wanted to be more helpful to both faculty and students throughout the process. So we weren't going to be sad to retire our service of decollating and recollating exams. And we haven't had a recollating party in a couple of years now. And although that was a nice sociable time, I'm glad that we're spending our time doing something more important than that. So in the end, through that process of discovery, we felt we had plenty of evidence that it was the right time, if not maybe a bit late, to move into the 21st century with all this. And we spent a lot of time doing our homework, as it were. And I'll be honest that we didn't actually look at any competitors. ExamSoft came to the fore pretty early on, mostly from talking to our peer schools. And we never felt like we really had to move in a different direction. And I believe my first call to the company was around December 2013, so just over 3 years ago. And keep in mind that we actually didn't roll out our first exam to our students until August 2014. So that's quite a number of months later. And we'll come back to that concept. But I had at least a few product overviews on my own and with my supervisor before talking about it at all really in detail with faculty. And the reason for that is I wanted to be, as far ahead as possible with my own knowledge of what it was before bringing it into a sort of curriculum committee or something like that. So we could sort of, make sure the audience was prepped in the right way. And I just wanted to be confident that I understood how the platform worked and how we would kind of adopt it in the context of our curriculum and operation. So it would, by the time we would meet with the curriculum committee, we would be able to really tie things into their, to what was meaningful to them rather than just have it be another product demo. So here are the things that we did in the research phase. Excuse me. We really weren't shy about asking questions and talking through very specific challenges. For instance, we don't have a testing facility, and we'd previously only administered exams in large amphitheaters, and we knew that wasn't going to work when it came to computer-based testing because of the configuration of the amphitheater. The furniture wasn't appropriate. We actually don't have power at every seat, so that's pretty difficult if you want to have a computer, have computers plugged in for longer exams. And I will say that the staff at ExamSoft were just incredibly useful in helping us think through these challenges and drawing parallels to other schools. I mean, I think one of the benefits of going with the product that so many other schools are using is that they do have the ability to draw from the experience of those other schools, and chances are you're just not alone in whatever issues that you're facing. So we had a lot of specific things that we talked about, and at the risk of sharing too much detail during that process, we ended up just being able to think through a lot even before we decided to go with the product at all. And then we got recommended to talk to a couple peer schools who were using the product. There were a lot of lessons learned doing that. If they discussed problems that they were having with the software, I usually could press them on it and sort of unpack them and figure out how to work around similar problems or avoid them altogether if we were to encounter them. And so, my experience sort of being someone who's very tech savvy and having to work with people who might not be at my level, a lot of times people want to say something doesn't work or like, this was broken or it glitched or something like that. And, I find that it's usually a lot more complicated than that. So when someone would say something like this was a little bit problematic, I would just sort of press them and see, well, what part of the operation kind of made that happen? Was it really the software, or was it just that we didn't kind of, you didn't think all the details through? And I went into this process assuming it was going to be a very large project and a huge culture shift for faculty, students, and staff. And so back to my earlier point, I really didn't expect it to just sort of happen magically just because we adopted the software. So talking to other schools was a reminder that a project can be very effortful, even if it's going exactly as intended. So those are some of the things we did just to kind of gather information and keep moving ahead. And once we'd done all of this background work, it was finally time to talk to faculty and other senior staff about whether we should move ahead with the product. And our approach to this phase, you'll see, basically echoes many points that I've already made. Be realistic about the work involved, keep it relevant, be specific. The last point was important for me. The old adage kind of, you can bring a horse to water but not make him drink. I know we have international participants here, so maybe you can write in the comments what your similar idiom is for that, so I can learn something new today. But the faculty, and specifically one of our curriculum committees, needed to be responsible for making the decision to adopt the product. So I could say all I wanted to about how great I think it was or how much it's just going to improve everybody's experience, but ultimately, we really needed to get their buy-in so we can move ahead with it. So I helped by making things as clear as possible, and just so that everyone could have an idea that there was a lot of common ground that was leading, everyone around the table to this path. Because, as I said, with so many different course directors having kind of disparate experiences, it wasn't necessarily obvious to them that they had some shared pain points and everything. So I was able to contextualize that for them. So we did finally decide to adopt the product, or I wouldn't be talking to you today, obviously. And the decision was made in the late spring of 2014 after having started the process of learning about it several months before. And we wanted to roll it out in the fall of 2014, so for the 2014-15 academic year, with the first exam taking place in September of that year. And That meant that the summer would be critical to the training process. What I did was I picked kind of a right-hand man in my department. He and I attended 4 web-based trainings together with someone from ExamSoft, and I felt strongly that I shouldn't be the only person that knew kind of all the bells and whistles about the product. But realistically, it wasn't possible on this timeline to get everybody in my staff who might be using the platform to sort of drop everything and just get trained on this. Even though in an ideal world, I think everybody would have kind of gone on the same training schedule. So phasing people in was kind of essential to me. And by and large, you know, there was an intuitive way to do this. And as staff went through their various curriculum responsibilities throughout the year, opportunities kind of arose to bring them up to speed on what we were doing with ExamSoft. So I did hold a lot of responsibility personally in the beginning, which made me a little nervous in case something happened to me that was unexpected. But I just thought it was the better way than kind of overwhelming people or expecting too much of my team without a realistic expectation of success. And so again, remembering the idea that it is not magic. You can't kind of snap your fingers and have everybody you know, up to the speed where you are. But by halfway through the year, I'd say all our staff who interacted with the system could do about 75% of what I knew how to do, if not more. And if you can kind of look through these few points here about training, what we did to train people, I think the last piece is really important, is to leave little to the imagination. Really think through your exam experiences. You know, remember that this might be a new platform, but the exam itself might still have the same goals or have the same, you know, desired experience for the students, you know, in a holistic way. And so think through your exam experience, assuming you can use that knowledge of your previous exams to inform the choices that you're going to make as you work with the software, because there are many choices in how you customize what you do on the platform, and that's one of the great things about it, but that means you have to be thoughtful about it. So make sure you understand how to accomplish what you want to do with the software and ask questions. Sometimes that requires you to rethink how you approach something very specific. One example of that is, you know, we were very used to having multiple choice questions, several questions that would share the same question stem. So on a paper exam, you could write the stem at the top and then have A, B, C, D, or your kind of 4 essays or maybe multiple choice sub questions on that one page and kind of work with it that way. But now we were moving towards, you know, ExamSoft, where it's more of an item banking approach. So each question is really an independent item. So we had to think about, okay, do we want to include the stem in every question? How do we want to kind of do that and not confuse the students? So a lot of times you're making these kind of editorial decisions in these circumstances, because there can be many ways to approach that type of a problem and no single correct way to do it. But if you really think everything through, you'll be well on your way, you know, to succeeding with that kind of decision making. So next, I'm going to talk about an approach to thinking it through, and you'll probably see that a lot of these points are self-explanatory. There's a lot of crossover to other phases in the process we've already talked about, and a lot of times you're asking yourself, you know, just, is this sensible? Is anybody going to be confused about what I'm doing, whether it's a student or faculty member who's grading the exam? We knew we wouldn't be able to accommodate, you know, faculty who gave us an exam the afternoon before, you know, that they're handing us a document that we're supposed to kind of print or whatever in the old days. And we could usually pull that off with very short notice when it's a paper exam, because you can kind of just hit print and hope your copy machine doesn't break. And it was, you know, that happened maybe more than I'd care to admit in the past. But as a result, you know, we had to, in order to be successful with an ExamSoft type product, we really had to be incessant about our timelines and kind of have a production timeline and really send frequent reminders to faculty so they really understood how to be successful with this and know that, you know, they're a stakeholder in the process, which means they have to hold up their end of the bargain. Another great example is some of the test runs that we did in the summer before the students arrived. And we staged kind of a mock exam in the space that we ultimately decided was going to be where we would be administering our exams. And the space that we chose was actually what had normally been used in our kind of wet lab activities, but those had really been used decreasingly over the years, as that was a space where students looked at physical specimens, or they used microscopes, and really using microscopes has kind of gone by the wayside as digital histology has come into play. And so we had a kind of underutilized space that also had power at every seat, because the power was there historically for the microscopes. And I figured, why not? I could run that idea by the team at ExamSoft, and they said, that sounds great. I don't see why that wouldn't work. So I took my staff into that area, and we just kind of imagined what it would be like to run through all the steps. How are we going to get the exam started? How are we going to administer the assessment password to students? There were some kind of strange space issues there, just with the way it was configured, even with just like the ability for students to kind of see the proctor from wherever they were sitting. So we just had to think through all that stuff and really kind of ask ourselves, if we do this, is this going to cause an issue or something like that? And so we addressed some of those immediate proctoring challenges. We also were doing this in 4 different spaces, because we only had kind of one group of students. Our students are divided into these 4 societies, as we call them, and that's where these lab areas were. So we had them split up into 4 areas, which means we had to realize, we probably need 4 proctors in every exam to really pull this off well. So that became a new kind of operational challenge for us to think through. And a lot of these were just details. We knew that things maybe wouldn't be perfect, but we really tried to imagine how things would go on the exam day, and I'm happy to say that that really paid off. So some things aren't going to go as planned, and that's okay. We should just be flexible about that. And I mentioned before that there are many ways to approach a problem, whether it's about how to stylize your exam question, or something about your operation. And what may sometimes seem like a fork in the road might just lead to a convergence of roads later on. So looking at these points, you'll notice again my theme of just being sensible. Don't take on too much at once. Work on what you can scale out for your operation. Add more features as you go, if that makes sense for you. And backup plans are a must in order to consider yourself a flexible person. And for us, we're a bring your own device school. We don't kind of provision laptops or iPads for students. We just tell students that they need to have a device that meets certain requirements for this purpose. And we knew, especially in the first year, where in some cases, students were kind of going from not having had a device requirement to all of a sudden needing this device, and maybe not all of them were able to go out and purchase a new one or upgrade their machine or something like that. And so that was something that we definitely thought through, and we knew we had to have some type of backup device for students, not just for that reason, but also in case there was some unexpected crash or something for a student. Another backup plan that I'm happy to say we only did for the very first exam was to print hard copies for each student in case we, as the staff planning the exam, really messed something up beyond control. And I was pretty sure we weren't going to do that, because we'd followed all these steps that I've already gone through. But it was just that peace of mind thing where it's like, all right, you know what? If we really just don't get it off the ground on that first try, we can just say, no worries. This was a test run. Everybody take one of these paper exams. We know how to deal with that. I'm pleased to say that we didn't need to use them at all. So the only thing that really suffered in that process was the trees that went into making that paper, but we did recycle the unused copies. So I hope this gives you a framework for just sort of thinking through the various thought processes that were going on during what amounted to a 9-month process. Remembering that we started in December, and our first exam wasn't until September. And that might seem like a long time, but for me it felt, I didn't really feel rushed ever, and I didn't feel like we were going too slowly. It made it so we could accommodate people's summer vacations, things like that, and not feel like, oh man, we're really going to miss this deadline if we don't just kind of totally rush through it. So I'm sure it goes differently at different schools, but the important thing is to be mindful and realistic. And it's an ongoing process for us. We're really pleased with how it's gone so far. We are in our third year now, which means we are truly starting to capitalize on, you know, the initial workload that goes into the first year, maybe even the second year. For us, it was a little strange because we changed our curriculum after using it for 1 year. So last year was sort of even though it was our second year, it was sort of like our first year because we did have new exams and new items and new pedagogy. So we were kind of redeveloping our exam content. But now we're in the second year of that curriculum, and we're starting to do the more advanced things. You know, I mentioned don't take on all the features at once if you're not really sure how you're going to utilize them. I'll say in the first year we didn't do a whole lot with you know, the analytics around exam items, but as we go into, you know, the second iteration of a course, the faculty are asking, how did this question perform last year? I want to write my exams more efficiently. That was the whole reason why we came on board with ExamSoft. And now, you know, we can learn that that's what they want to know about, and we can preemptively send them that type of information even without them asking, and know that that's going to help them get their exams created in a timely fashion, which ultimately helps us, ultimately helps the students, and everybody wins. So those are the things that are kind of happening for us now. Also, of course, just operationally, it's just become part of our culture. We have new staff come on board here and there, and we have to train them, but it's just I'm not stressed about it anymore because I can, even if I'm not around, somebody else can train a new person. So that's really wonderful as well. So I hope that's sort of a helpful overview for you. We'll definitely turn it over to some questions now. I'd be happy to talk more about what's happened in kind of the live phase, since I mostly talked about the planning phase, but feel free to ask any questions that are on your mind, and thank you.
Evan, thanks very much. Excellent presentation, really enjoyable. Thank you. I should apologize, I guess, on behalf of ExamSoft for eradicating your decollation parties, but I'm hoping you substituted them with some other kind of party.
Now, I mean, if we have a spare hour, we can have like a real party, you know. So,
so just as a reminder to all the folks on the call, please go ahead and type questions in the question box there, and I'll go through and pick any out. While you're thinking, and we haven't got any right now, so while I'll give you a couple of minutes perhaps to digest the presentation and perhaps write some questions. And if I can be selfish, Evan, I got a couple of questions myself, and they kind of relate to the title of your webinar, ExamSoft Outcomes, Planning, Goals, and Implementation. You certainly talked about some of the goals and some of the outcomes as well, perhaps with emphasis more on the operational side. So taking the medical school as a whole, could you just outline, you know, sort of top 3 goals for the school overall at the outset, way back in 2014, and thus far, 2.5, 3 years later, what outcomes you've seen both for faculty, the school as a whole, and for, of course, the students?
yeah, I mean, I think in many respects, the goals for faculty match the students because their goal is to educate students. So I think, you know, the timely and meaningful feedback to students is important for the faculty and the students, because if students are getting that information in a meaningful and timely way, then, you know, if a student is struggling, then you can start a remediation plan for them really quickly. And that's something that a faculty member wants to engage in, but if too much time goes by, you kind of miss a window of opportunity. And faculty have other responsibilities too, especially in medical school. You know, they're mostly accountable to the hospitals where they practice medicine, and they might not be available for educational responsibilities at all times of the year. So that's a really huge one. One that I didn't talk a whole lot about is, you know, the kind of curriculum, the assessment goals of the program. I think that that's been a real hot topic for us in general, something that we're really still on a trajectory with in terms of, you know, defining our assessment plan and how we monitor it. But this is, in perhaps a good way, putting the cart before the horse a little bit, because ExamSoft really helps us, categorize and organize all of this content, whether it's the questions themselves or the student performance data, and that really helps us, have a better way of looking at what's going on in assessment at a whole. So that's a really huge goal for the institution, and that certainly came up a lot, when we were doing our early planning. People were interested in that, and we're just starting to really tap into that now, as I kind of hinted at the end of the presentation. And I guess a third goal, not to rehash it really, but it really was the sort of operational aspect, that it was just going to create a good experience for everybody and really solve those pain points. And ultimately, I think that's what enabled us to just kind of move forward with it, because we're like, there's just too many wins that we're going to get right away, even without doing many deep dives on what we're going to get out of the system.
Great, thank you. So I do have a question here. It's from Zeynep in Turkey. Hello, I have a technical question. When you are in the exam, can you be on the internet and open another application? Thanks.
That's a great question. That's a setting that you can toggle, and we have taken advantage of it. We've taken advantage of the choice to set that on or off. So exams can be completely blocked off from the internet and not allow students to get on the internet at all, or they can allow internet access. And we've had exams that we want to consider open book, but of course we don't really have books anymore. All students' materials and notes and stuff are online, and so when an instructor says, I want to make my exam open book, that often means that we will enable internet access, but our default is to make them secure.
Thanks, Evan. Thanks, Zeynep, also for the question. We still have at least 15 minutes if we need them for questions. So please go ahead and ask any. Again, if I can just ask one more question, Evan, because I'm curious. What have students themselves said about their experience of computer-based testing on ExamSoft so far? What have they told you?
Yeah, the students really liked it immediately, and we had a really great kind of built-in experiment, because that first year that we did it, we had students who were in the second year of the curriculum, so they were already a year in. They had spent a year writing exams on paper, and so we were a little concerned of the sort of just technical aspects of moving them into a really robust system and making sure everyone had their devices and all that. But because that was pretty successful, the students kind of said immediately, like, wow, thank you so much for finally doing this. So that was kind of all we really needed. As the new students matriculate and start their each year now, they don't have a basis for comparison. All they know at our institution is ExamSoft, so it becomes a no news is good news kind of thing. They might make some requests for aesthetic details that we can manipulate, like, it'd be great if you kind of put the image in the question like this or whatever. And those are those editorial things and kind of having nothing to do with the system. So we're always getting feedback on how to create our exams better. But nobody said, man, I really hate this, or it's not working. It's always been positive. Actually, one great example of something that was an immediate win for us was, we're in medical school, we are a very image-heavy curriculum. They're looking at images, whether it's because they're doing an imaging curriculum on radiology or learning how to read CT scans, or they're in their anatomy course and they're supposed to look at an anatomical image or a picture of a cadaver or something like that. And on a paper exam that was printed on a black and white copier, that's really pretty terrible, and we would project those images onto a projection screen in the amphitheater so they could see something in color. But you might have a really rotten seat in the amphitheater and not be able to see it, and that was probably the biggest annoyance for students, is that we had so many images on questions and they couldn't manipulate them on their own. And now all of a sudden with the platform, they can go in, zoom in on the images, look at it on their own pace. It's not like, oh, the minute for that slide is up, we're moving to the next slide. It's all up to them now, so it just gives them the control that they really like.
Question from Peter. Do you provide exam review sessions for the students?
Yeah, that's a hot topic. We have our kind of standard way of doing things now, and this was one of the things that we really had to think through now that we had a system that could give immediate feedback. And so we figured, well, we get immediate feedback, there has to be time to allow for it. Whereas before, all of that would happen, off hours. So that was something that we had to get faculty on board with, say, like, listen, you're going to have to allow 20 or 30 minutes to have students go through the answers. And this particularly works for multiple choice exams, not as well for us with essay exams, because we tend to like them to be graded before we give the answers back. But that's what we ended up doing. So we sort of have a review session in that students get to review on the multiple choice exams how they did, what they got wrong, what they got right, potentially additional feedback about the questions, and they do that immediately following the exam. Although that is a choice that you have with ExamSoft, that you can schedule that review for a later time, and that's up to you as the exam creator. Sometimes we still have a more traditional review session, like even though the students may have already gotten their feedback through that immediate review, we might still have just a time with the faculty member to go over things in more detail or answer questions, and then that's just another part of things that we have to schedule. So.
Okay, thanks, Evan. It looks like we're out of questions. So one more time, Evan, I'd just like to thank you on behalf of all the attendees, ExamSoft and myself, for your time. I thought you made some excellent points, and in 40 minutes, I've certainly learned a lot. And the presentation, I mean, it looks like a great blueprint for success in terms of implementation. I particularly liked your emphasis on actually people and change management more than the software. Of course, I mean, the software is also important, right? But the emphasis seemed to be very much on change management, which I found very interesting. So thanks again. I'm going to wrap up now. Just a couple more points as a reminder. The recording of the webinar will be out within the next 48 hours. And if you do have time to fill in the survey, which you'll get at the conclusion of the webinar, it'd be great if you could fill that in. Be much appreciated. So thanks, everybody, and goodbye.
Thank you.